So we're going to try and figure out how to make this potion bottle. Right, just going to start a new document, 9020 by 1080. So the point of this bowl in this tutorial setting is the fact that it's pretty much drawn entirely with vector shapes, which is really handy when you want to scale something later. Rather than doing it with the paintbrush, we're going to try and do it almost entirely with vector shapes, and I'm just going to show you quickly, as quick as I can, how it goes. Start with an ellipse, and I'm just going to create a rounded rectangle. And that's our bottle. Those two shapes there. I'm going to use the white arrow, direct selection tool, to select these top points of this one, and then Control T to just scale the top slightly. So I'm going to select both these layers by holding Shift and clicking on both, and then Control E merges them together. Now, although they're one shape, they're still editable as separate shapes, but I'm going to end that here by going up to this little box here. I guess this might be hidden, you might have to find it somehow, but normally when you've got the direct selection tool highlighted, that should appear somewhere, but yeah, have a look around. Now I have to select both the shapes and I can hit merge shape components. There we go, we've got that shape now. I'm going to copy that shape by Control J, which just copies it on top of itself. Control T, going to make it smaller within that original shape and move it around a bit. So just to make things easier, I'm going to make that a different color. I'm going to edit, and I'm going to lock the shape below it so I can see it as a visual guide but not edit it. It doesn't get tangled up in me editing it. Control T again. So on the previous one, what I did here was using the pen tool. I made a couple of extra points each side, and I deleted the point in the middle holding Alt. I get the little edit handle tool and I can just round that. Obviously in Illustrator there'd be a tool for that, round corner tool and whatnot, but here it's Photoshop. It's using vectors in Photoshop. It's not quite as good as Illustrator, but you do have the advantage of a lot more of Photoshop effects, obviously. So I'm just playing around with these points to get the curve looking nice. I could spend ages doing that. I'm going to unlock the layer behind. I'm going to duplicate that. So we've got a spare. I'm going to combine those two shapes like we did before, but this time, rather than merge them, I'm going to exclude overlapping shapes. So now I have that outline. So it doesn't need to be red, obviously. It's going to be glass, so it's going to be closer to white, and the background's going to be closer to white. And seeing as I'm going to be working in white, make a new layer, Control A, and Control backspace, and it will fill with one of your colors. If you happen to fill it white, then just Control I, X switches your palette colors there. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the stroke on both of those. I don't want it. I'm going to reduce their opacity. You can use the number pad. There you go. Now you've got your basic jar. Not really a jar. This is the first shape of the cork, or the stopper. I'm just going to Alt drag that to make a smaller one, and scale that down. I'm just going to manually, with the pen tool, draw a shape to sort of link those two. So the nice thing about vector is you can zoom in, you can also edit it. I'm doing a bit of flattening here, but I'm going to flatten those two shapes together, and I'm going to merge them. So we've got the top of the cork, which will make a brown colour. And the sort of side of the cork, which for now we'll make just a slightly darker colour so we can see it. So in my other one I did it slightly differently. I had the background going around the front here, but in this one I think I'm going to create that as a separate shape. So using the ellipse tool again, just going to eyeball match that up. And using A, direct select tool, I'm going to just bring that down, and using the little handles here, just edit that as a shape. Bring that to the front, above all the layers. You can use control square brackets to move it around. I'm just going to edit this shape so it feels like it's a little bit more convincingly following the form of the glass. I guess there's probably a term for the little nub on the end, some sort of beading or something, I don't know. But it's quite often slightly bigger there just due to how they've blown the glass. So I can multiple select those two layers and just move them out a little bit to match my top bit. So I want that to curve in a bit, so I'm going to make a new shape there. Just select that point and bring it in a bit. It's actually a bit of a mistake, because now I have to do that on that layer too. But it's no big deal because it's vector, so that's great. Okay, it's not convincing yet. There's some issues with this. We'll definitely want to see that go round the side by the cork a bit more. We're going to be convinced that that's the top of the bottle. And probably around here too. So with it selected, I can use the pen tool. It can get a bit fiddly. When you've got the pen tool selected, you can hold Alt over the points, you can hold Control and it goes to the white direct select arrow as well, and then toggles back to the pen tool, so that's quite a handy mode to be in if you want to be editing vector shapes. Cool, I'm reasonably, it's not perfect, I'm reasonably happy with that though. Okay, so that's your basic bottle. Just group that. Name it bottle. I'm just going to make some contents of the bottle. So using an ellipse, drag that out across the internal radius of the bottle. I should probably try and match the perspective of the cork a bit more. This whole thing's very fake 3D, so I'm not attempting to really create a massively realistic perspective. It's kind of cartoony. Make a second ellipse and just match that to the original shape of the glass. So we're going to make that more transparent so we can see through it. A few little discrepancies here could be nice, actually. To start playing with the refraction illusion, and then set the opacity of that to something 45. So right now that one's on top. I'm going to move that to the behind and just get them matching up a little bit better. So that's basically it. The rest is all just finessing. So if you've got a few moments, I'm going to carry on. Some bubbles. Start in the same way as everything else today. Pretty much. So we're going to keep that one as an underwater bubble. Not water, but potion, under potion bubble. Just going to alt drag that, make a few little smaller ones, drag one to the surface and squash it to be a bit more like a bubble that's burst. Or a bubble that's floating on the surface. Okay, so these bubbles look pretty flat, but if I just go replace the fill with a gradient, just select a basic black to white gradient and angle it from my imaginary light source, which is going to be top left, and then set the blending mode here to overlay, I get something. I can copy shape attributes to my other bubbles, paste shape attributes, or I could again make them the same layer, but then the gradient would run across all the layers rather than the individual layers. So I'm just going to paste shape attributes, make sure that's set to overlay. I guess I could have done that as copy layer style probably. I would have copied that. That little slight size discrepancy is causing a little issue there, so I'm just going to scale that down. Now with the bottle, I think that's way overdue some layer styles. So with the, which one is this? The whole thing, just going to color code it. Yellow, outer, blue, that's the cork. I'm going to group that and call that cork. Call that rim. I'm going to apply an inner shadow to this to make it look like there's light hitting it. An inner shadow coming from that imaginary angle, and right now I can't actually see it showing up, so I'm going to reduce the fill opacity there. Okay. I think the size is set so huge. Okay, so you might have to play around with it for a bit. Right there I had to bring the fill opacity right down because it was just white, and this was absolutely huge. Okay, and instantly that's made some sort of interesting, slightly toony cartoony-like depth to it. You could try a dark inner shadow coming from the opposite side. Let's just use global light. I didn't want that. So I'm going to untick use global light on the dark one so I can get it coming from the opposite angle. I can get that working. Yep. I'm going to alt drag those effects to the layer below it. See, they're not showing up there at all. I'm going to go to the opacity, bring that up to 100, bring the fill down. There we go. It brings the actual inside opacity down, but leaves the effects. Cool. Well, that's sort of getting there. And it feels like this bit's open. The front bit is actually open. So with the pen tool, I'm going to sort of manually take liberties to draw a reflection on there. Trying to help convince the viewer of the shape of this object. Just rounding those corners off a bit. And I'm going to apply that can't be below the cork. I'm going to apply an overlay effect to that, and pressing P, get the options up for that. I'm going to apply a gradient to that, just a white one. Sliding the scale around there. It's possibly a little tedious. You could definitely try using a layer style if the shape gradient is giving you hassle. There's one shine. I'm just going to do a sort of counter shine down here. So that gradient seems to be a bit too bright down at the bottom. I kind of want it fading down more. A little fiddly. I'll probably end up fading the whole layer out quite a lot here. Setting it to overlay possibly. It's very subtle now. Hardly worth any of that hassle. Now on the inner bit, I'm going to apply some inner glow on the actual potion itself. to give it some texture. A stippled effect, maybe you don't want that. Reduce the noise. I turned that effect off. There it is. So shifting it into the center rather than it glowing from the edge might give us the effect I'm after. Inner shadows again coming to our rescue. Make sure not to tick global light, otherwise all the shadows will move, which is sometimes what you want, sometimes not. And you can start to produce some variants of color across the thing. I'm just going to alt drag those effects onto the layer below it. And you can see you've got our potion. I'm just going to group the potion, make that layer red. And there we have it, sort of next stage level up in terms of fidelity. So you could apply some effects to the cork to give it some more texture, inner glow with some noise, could be nice. Keep it subtle. Gradient overlay, quite nice to do highlights with the radial, can get fiddly. Gradient overlay set to reflected should give us this feeling of a curved and the inner glow just to give us some of that grain on there. So for the last trick, I'm going to take these layers, actually I'm going to apply just a very subtle gradient on the base, on the background layer. It says subtle. So we've got a bit more variety of the background. And group those layers together, duplicate them, and make a smart object. Now that's messed up some of our transparencies, which is, slightly annoying. Now when I apply a smart filter to this, because it's a smart object, I can always edit it later, which is nice. Filter gallery, and it pops up this dialogue showing us all this different lovely, rather retro type effects. Photocopy is quite cool, but right now I'm going to go for chrome. It gives us this strange chrome-like effect. I'm going to set the overlay, make sure the background, the original's on. I'm going to set that to overlay. Now using the layer mask, not just the filter mask, I'm going to brush out bits like on the cork, because the cork's not glass. highlights on the bubbles that went a bit funny. But all in all, I'm quite happy with that. It's a little bit pixelated. So with the smart object selected, I'm going to go up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and just add 0.8 just to smooth up some of those bits. And last but not least, I'm just going to create a shadow and put in the very background. Set that to 10 around. What did I set it to? 32. Angle it from our imaginary light source. Set it as a gradient, where one layer is black. Sorry, one end of the gradient is black, and the other end is black, but set to 0% opacity. Angle that appropriately. Get rid of the stroke on that. We've got a basic shadow there. I'm going to duplicate that layer, Control J, make a smaller version of it, put it just inside it, and change that gradient to this red. And fade that out a tiny bit more. So I think before I had those layers maybe in my Chrome filter, so I might open that smart object and drag those layers in and see whether I get some interesting. Okay, I can see a problem here. The smart object's not the same size, so it's going to cause all sorts of misalignment issues now, which we will deal with together. There we go, as suspected, it's off. Using the arrow keys to just match it back up. But it maybe was worth it to get these sort of refractions in the shadow. I think that'll do.